Hi everyone, I'm Nikki and welcome back to the Fundamentals of Print Design. In this final lesson of developing a design, we are going to talk about effects. Now, one thing to note is that throughout this entire section of developing a design, the way that I organize this is in a hierarchy of importance. We started with color and we ended at effects. And when I say importance, it means how much you're going to use this in your design and how important it is that it makes it into your final design. Now, effects is that subtle thing that you use only if you need it and only if it works to make your design better, not worse. And one of the biggest things that happens with effects is that people tend to overdo it. Now, I throw effects in here because I wanted to talk about it. And really, we have 0 effects in our final brochure. And I did that for a very important reason because I want to show you that you can have a successful design without any use of extra effects. And when I'm talking about effects, I'm talking about things like drop shadows, overlay, transparency, really bright outer glows, things like that. Very minimal in all of your designs should be the key whenever you're looking at an effect. So I'm going to show you how to use effects in our current design, and then hopefully you'll see that we really didn't need them in the first place, but there is a place for them when appropriate. So the first thing I want to show you is how you would go about placing an effect on your items. And we're going to start with our text. So what happens when you're looking at using effects? You tend to need it when you want to make something stand out. So for example, in this text right here, you may think, let's apply a drop shadow to this font to make it pop off of that background further. Now, you can see that you really don't need the drop shadow here, and that's what you really need to think about. Do I need it? But if you do, here's how you would go about applying it. You click on your element and you right-click, and then you have this great effects menu here. So let's look. What do we have? We have transparency, we have drop shadow, inner shadow, outer glow, inner glow, bevel and emboss, satin, basic feather, and directional and gradient feathers. These mimic the effects that you would find in Photoshop, and I find that I use most of these hardly at all. I rarely use the feather and the bevel and emboss. I just never really find a place for it. But if you have a project that requires it, your effects are right here. The 2 effects that I would use the most, however, would be a transparency or a drop shadow. So let's go ahead and look at our drop shadow here. I'm going to click preview so you can see the effect on our document as we work forward. Now, when you open up your effects, you might have clicked drop shadow, but you'll see that they all appear here. So you can turn them on and off as you work through your document if you want to. And I will tell you that whenever you're using your drop shadow, never use the default. That's just not a good look to go for. If anything, if you're ever going to use a drop shadow, I try to decrease the look of it by doing a couple things. For one, I always set the blending mode to normal. We don't really need it to be multiply, but you can see how much darker the multiply is. So it does depend on the background that you are attempting to have this show up against. And then your opacity can go back up to 100 if you want to. See, so that's just a lot easier than that. That's really like, hello, I'm really black. So normal kind of brings that down, and you can bump that opacity back up to 100% so you can still see it. Your positioning of this is basically how you want this drop shadow to come out of your text. You can apply a different angle to this, and you can see it move over here, how you want that to appear. Most drop shadows do kind of come out where your light source is coming from the top. So if our drop shadow is peeking out from below, that means our light is coming this way. And you can offset your X and Y coordinates a little bit. You can bring it out away from your text, or you can bring it in. Basically, the smaller the number, the closer it is. And if you add a 0 here, it'll bring it in that much closer. See? So now you barely see it, and that actually is the way that I love it the most. It kind of has a subtle hint, and I'll zoom in here in a second so you can see it, a subtle hint instead of being in your face as a drop shadow. So that is my preferred way to place a drop shadow. And we'll hit OK here. And if I zoom in for you, see how subtle that is. You can kind of make it out here, but it just kind of creates a little bit of pop from our image if we didn't have it at all. So if I go back to our drop shadow now that we're zoomed in here, see if you had that set to multiply, it just really pops off. Now, there really is nothing wrong with that. It just depends on the look that you're going for. So that doesn't look horrible, but I will say that without it, it's just, in my mind, much better. You really don't need that drop shadow to have this text pop off. So that's definitely a personal choice when it comes to that. But I will say the lighter the better when it comes to drop shadows. And you do not want to have drop shadows on every element that you have in your document. For example, down here, if you applied a drop shadow to that text, first of all, you can just tell when you put it there that you don't really need it. You could take this closer, drop this down in opacity, but you still don't need it. And that's one of the things when it comes to design that people do. They tend to overuse that drop shadow to bring the text out of their background. So I would encourage you to figure out another way to do that before you go to the effect. You could also use a drop shadow to highlight these images a little bit. That creates kind of a fun separation. That's fine. See this drop shadow right here? I don't really care for it on this side, but right here, that creates kind of a 3D effect. That's kind of cool. So that's where drop shadows work. I don't want you to think that it's all never useful and it doesn't work, but that is a case where the drop shadow looks pretty decent. It kind of creates a layered effect and makes that image pop off that background in kind of a fun way. So that's where it does work. But again, see if you need it. If you don't need it, then don't use it. Other effects would be the fun, again, overused outer glow. I would almost stay away from this entirely if at all possible. I never use outer glow in my document. I find other ways to create the look that I want, and I seldom ever need it. Same with all of these down here below. You can do some fun things with feathering if you want to, but I just find that I really don't need that. Feathering would come in handy if you have something overlaid and you want this to kind of fade back a little bit to show the image underneath. That would work in that case. All right, the next step, we're going to take our brochure and we're going to finalize it. We're going to prepare it for print and get the final stages going on this project. Thanks so much for watching.